In the seventh year of Emperor Taizong's reign, when the Tang Dynasty stretched its golden influence across the Silk Road and the capital of Chang'an bustled with merchants from distant lands, Li Yunhua found herself standing at the gates of the city with her two young sons, carrying nothing but a small bundle of possessions and the bitter knowledge that they had nowhere left to go. Her husband, Li Wenxian, had died 6 months earlier, not in glorious battle or from honorable old age, but from a shameful accusation of corruption that had destroyed his reputation and stripped their family of everything they had possessed. As a mid-level government official, Wenxian had been responsible for overseeing grain distribution to rural provinces, a position that required both integrity and political sensitivity in an empire where famine could spark rebellion. When reports emerged of grain shortages in provinces under his supervision, while government warehouses remained mysteriously depleted, Wenxian had been arrested and interrogated. He maintained his innocence until his death in prison, claiming that his superior officials had orchestrated the theft while making him the convenient scapegoat. But innocence mattered little when powerful enemies needed someone to blame for their own failures. Li Yunhua had watched helplessly as their property was confiscated, their social connections severed, and their reputation destroyed. Her husband's death left her with 2 sons to protect. 8-year-old Li Ming, intelligent beyond his years but physically frail, and 5-year-old Li Gang, robust and cheerful despite their circumstances. With no family willing to take them in, her husband's relatives feared association with a disgraced name, while her own family lacked the resources to support 3 additional people. Li Yunhua had sold everything she could carry and made the desperate journey to Chang'an, hoping that the vast capital might offer opportunities denied to them in their small provincial city. Now, as evening shadows stretched across the bustling streets, she realized that Chang'an might be their final destination in more ways than she had anticipated. Chapter 2. The Cruel Reality of Survival. Chang'an, the jewel of the Tang Empire, promised opportunity to those with money, connections, or marketable skills. For a widow with 2 young children and a family name tainted by scandal, it offered only the harsh realities of survival at society's margins. Li Yunhua's first attempts to find respectable employment ended in polite but firm rejections. Merchants who might have hired an educated woman to keep accounts or manage correspondence recoiled when they learned her surname and her husband's disgrace. Noble families seeking tutors for their children showed initial interest in her education and gentle manner, but quickly withdrew their offers upon discovering her circumstances. "We cannot risk association with your family's unfortunate history," one potential employer explained, with the cold courtesy of someone who considered themselves generous for offering any explanation at all. As their small savings dwindled, Li Yunhua was forced to accept increasingly menial work. Washing clothes for traveling merchants, preparing food for taverns that catered to the city's transient population, cleaning the shops of craftsmen who paid barely enough to buy rice and shelter for a single night. Her sons, meanwhile, discovered the special cruelties that children reserve for those they perceive as different or vulnerable. Other children on the streets mocked them for their shabby clothes and lack of permanent residence, while shopkeepers shooed them away from doorways where they might rest during their mother's long working hours. Li Ming, despite his youth, understood their situation clearly and tried to help by finding odd jobs of his own. Carrying messages for merchants, sweeping shops, or holding horses for customers. His earnings were pitiful, but his determination to contribute to their survival revealed a maturity that both broke and strengthened his mother's heart. Little Li Gang, too young to fully comprehend their circumstances, struggled with hunger and exhaustion while maintaining the sunny disposition that had made him his father's favorite. Chapter 3. The Intervention of Fate. Prince Li Kuan was not supposed to be wandering the streets of Chang'an's merchant quarter on that particular autumn evening. As the third son of Emperor Taizong, his official schedule consisted of court ceremonies, military training, scholarly pursuits, and the carefully orchestrated social engagements that maintained royal dignity while building political alliances. But Li Kuan had always been restless within the confines of palace protocol. At 28, he had distinguished himself in military campaigns against the Turks and had earned his father's respect through both martial prowess and administrative competence. Yet he often felt disconnected from the empire he was meant to help govern, isolated from the common people whose lives were affected by imperial policies. That evening, he had dismissed his usual escort and ventured into the city disguised as a wealthy merchant, seeking the kind of authentic interactions that his royal status normally prevented. He wanted to understand how ordinary citizens viewed the dynasty's policies, what challenges they faced in their daily lives, and whether the prosperity that characterized official reports accurately reflected common experience. He was observing the evening activities in a busy marketplace when he noticed Li Yunhua and her sons. What caught his attention initially was not their obvious poverty. Chang'an had many poor residents, but the way they carried themselves despite their circumstances. The woman maintained dignity in her bearing even as she negotiated for day-old bread with carefully counted copper coins. The older boy helped his mother with quiet efficiency, while the younger child waited patiently despite obvious hunger. When Li Kuan moved closer to observe this family, he overheard a conversation that changed his perspective on their situation. A shopkeeper was refusing to allow them to shelter under his awning during a sudden rain shower, citing concerns about their effect on his business reputation. "Please," Li Yunhua was saying, "we'll move as soon as the rain stops. My sons are tired and we have nowhere else to go. Find somewhere else to be unfortunate," the shopkeeper replied coldly. "I can't have people seeing beggars loitering around my establishment." Chapter 4. The Prince's Investigation. Prince Li Kuan's training in both military intelligence and administrative oversight had taught him to gather information systematically before taking action. Rather than intervening immediately in the scene he had witnessed, he spent the following days quietly investigating the circumstances that had brought Li Yunhua and her sons to such desperate straits. Using his network of contacts throughout the imperial bureaucracy, he learned the full story of Li Wenshan's disgrace and death. What he discovered troubled him deeply. The corruption charges appeared to be fabrications designed to protect higher-ranking officials who had actually orchestrated the grain theft. Li Wenshan had been chosen as a scapegoat precisely because his honest nature and lack of powerful political connections made him vulnerable to false accusations. More disturbing was the discovery that this pattern of corruption and scapegoating was not isolated. Several other mid-level officials had been destroyed in similar fashion, their families left destitute while the true perpetrators continued to profit from their positions. Li Kuan realized that Li Yunhua's family represented more than just individual tragedy. They symbolized a systemic problem that undermined the dynasty's moral authority and practical effectiveness. If honest officials could be destroyed by false accusations while corrupt ones remained protected by political connections, the entire governmental structure was compromised. Meanwhile, he continued to observe the family's daily struggles with growing admiration for their resilience and dignity. Despite their poverty and social isolation, Li Yunhua maintained high standards for her sons' behavior and education. She used their evening hours to teach them reading, writing, and moral principles, ensuring that their circumstances did not degrade their character or aspirations. Li Ming, the older boy, showed remarkable intelligence and maturity in helping support the family, while Li Gang's cheerful nature remained undimmed by hardship. All three family members treated each other and even strangers with kindness and respect that contrasted sharply with the selfishness and cruelty Li Kuan often observed among the wealthy and powerful. By the end of his investigation, Prince Li Kuan had made a decision that would surprise his court advisors and potentially create political complications for himself. Chapter 5. The Prince Reveals Himself. Prince Li Kuan chose to reveal his identity during a moment when Li Yunhua's family faced immediate crisis. The inn where they had been staying for several days, paying daily for the cheapest accommodation available, suddenly demanded that they leave because other guests had complained about sharing space with people of questionable background. Li Yunhua stood in the inn's courtyard with her sons and their meager possessions, calculating whether her remaining money could secure them another night's shelter or whether she should save it for food. The innkeeper, a man whose prosperity had made him cruel rather than generous, showed no sympathy for their situation. "I run a respectable establishment," he declared loudly enough for other guests to hear. "I can't have my reputation damaged by housing criminals' families." It was at this moment that Prince Li Kuan stepped forward, dropping the merchant disguise he had maintained for several days. His voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed immediately. "These people are under my protection," he announced, producing the jade token that identified him as an imperial prince. "Any insult to them is an insult to me personally." The innkeeper's face went pale as he recognized both the token and the implications of what he had just heard. Offending a prince could result in anything from financial ruin to execution, depending on the severity of the offense and the prince's temperament. Li Yunhua stared at the man who had just interceded on their behalf, struggling to understand why someone of such exalted rank would involve himself in their troubles. Her sons pressed close to her sides, uncertain whether this development represented salvation or a new form of danger. Prince Li Kuan addressed Li Yunhua directly, his manner respectful rather than condescending. "Madam, I have learned of your husband's innocence and your family's unjust suffering. I offer you my protection and the opportunity to rebuild your lives with dignity and security." Chapter 6. The Offer of Sanctuary. Prince Li Kuan's residence occupied several acres within Chang'an's Imperial District, featuring elegant gardens, multiple courtyards, and living quarters that could accommodate a substantial household staff and numerous guests. Unlike the ostentatious palaces of some royal relatives, Li Kuan's home reflected his practical nature and military background. Beautiful but functional, impressive without being overwhelming. When he brought Li Yunhua and her sons to this residence, they entered a world that seemed as distant from their recent experiences as the moon from the earth. Servants greeted them with the respectful courtesy they showed all guests of their master, while the prince's major domo, an elderly man named Zhang Wei, took immediate charge of ensuring their comfort and needs. "These are my honored guests," Prince Li Kuan announced to his household staff. "They are to be treated with the same respect and consideration you would show members of my own family." Li Yunhua, overwhelmed by this sudden transformation of their circumstances, struggled to understand what the prince expected in return for such extraordinary generosity. In her experience, powerful people never offered something for nothing, and their kindness always came with prices that might be higher than the benefits they provided. When she attempted to express these concerns, Li Kuan addressed them directly. "Madam, I understand your caution. You have learned that trust can be dangerous, and that accepting help often creates obligations you cannot fulfill. But I ask nothing from you except the opportunity to demonstrate that justice still has meaning in our empire." He explained his investigation into her husband's case and his discovery of the systematic corruption that had destroyed their family. "Your husband was innocent, and his persecution was a crime against both your family and the state. I cannot resurrect him or restore your past, but I can ensure that you and your sons have the opportunity to build a future worthy of your character and capabilities. The prince's household, Li Yunhua soon discovered, operated according to principles that emphasized merit, loyalty, and mutual respect. Servants were treated fairly. Decisions were made based on practical considerations rather than arbitrary whims, and everyone was expected to contribute their best efforts while being supported in their personal growth and development. Chapter 7. The Beginning of New Lives. As days turned into weeks, Li Yunhua and her sons gradually adapted to their new circumstances while discovering the full extent of Prince Li Kuan's intentions for their future. Rather than treating them as dependents who should be grateful for charity, he approached their situation as an opportunity for mutual benefit. Li Yunhua, he learned, possessed administrative skills and understanding of government operations that had been wasted during her years of domestic life. Her education, combined with her experiences as an official's wife, gave her insights into bureaucratic processes that could be valuable in managing the prince's own administrative responsibilities. I need someone I can trust to help manage correspondence with provincial officials, Li Kuan explained. Your understanding of how government actually functions, rather than how it's supposed to function, makes you ideal for identifying problems and suggesting solutions. For Li Yunhua, the opportunity to use her education and intelligence in meaningful work represented a form of salvation she had never dared to hope for. After months of feeling useless and burdensome, she discovered that she had valuable skills and knowledge that deserved respect and compensation. Meanwhile, Li Ming and Li Gang found themselves in an environment that nurtured their individual talents and interests. Li Ming's intellectual curiosity was encouraged through access to the prince's extensive library and tutoring by scholars who appreciated his quick mind and serious nature. Li Gang's more physical orientation led to training in martial arts and outdoor activities that channeled his energy constructively. Both boys also received moral education that emphasized the principles their father had tried to live by: integrity, compassion, and service to others. Prince Li Kuan personally participated in these lessons, sharing stories from his own experience that illustrated how power should be used to protect the vulnerable rather than exploit them. The transformation was remarkable but gradual. Li Yunhua regained confidence and authority as she took on increasing responsibilities. Her sons developed physically and intellectually while maintaining the core values that had sustained them through hardship. Most importantly, all three family members began to believe in their own worth and potential rather than seeing themselves as victims of circumstances beyond their control. Chapter 8. The Mother's Growing Influence. As Li Yunhua settled into her role as Prince Li Kuan's administrative assistant and advisor, her influence extended far beyond the management of correspondence and routine paperwork. Her unique perspective, combining education with experience of genuine hardship, provided insights that enhanced the prince's understanding of how imperial policies affected ordinary citizens. When provincial governors submitted reports claiming successful implementation of new agricultural policies, Li Yunhua could identify inconsistencies that suggested false information. Her husband's experience with grain distribution had taught her to recognize the warning signs of corruption and mismanagement that less experienced officials might miss. This report claims increased crop yields, she would point out, but the population figures don't match the grain distribution requests. Either the crops failed or someone is stealing the difference. Prince Li Kuan came to rely on her analytical abilities and began including her in meetings with other officials, initially as a secretary, but increasingly as a consultant whose opinions carried weight in policy discussions. This elevation of a woman with no noble connections but proven competence created some controversy among traditional court members. But Li Kuan's own reputation and achievements protected both him and Li Yunhua from serious criticism. Li Yunhua's growing confidence and authority also influenced how she approached her son's education and development. Rather than simply being grateful for opportunities provided by others, she began actively planning their futures and advocating for their advancement. Li Ming's intellectual gifts, she argued, qualified him for scholarly pursuits that could lead to positions in the imperial examination system. Li Gang's physical abilities and natural leadership suggested potential for military service under Prince Li Kuan's mentorship. They should be prepared to serve the empire based on their own merits, she told the prince, not simply as dependents grateful for your generosity. Li Kuan appreciated this attitude, which aligned with his own beliefs about merit-based advancement and social mobility. He began treating both boys as potential future officials or officers rather than simply objects of charity. Chapter 9. The Son's Remarkable Development. Under Prince Li Kuan's guidance, and with access to the best educational resources available in Chang'an, both Li Ming and Li Gang flourished in ways that exceeded even their mother's optimistic expectations. Their development demonstrated how much potential had been suppressed by poverty and social isolation, and how quickly that potential could emerge under proper conditions. Li Ming, now 11 years old, had progressed through classical texts that typically challenged much older students. His tutors reported that he not only memorized required materials, but demonstrated genuine understanding of complex philosophical and historical concepts. More impressively, he began applying these concepts to analysis of contemporary political situations, showing the kind of practical wisdom that marked future administrative leaders. Prince Li Kuan began including Li Ming in discussions about military strategy and imperial policy, finding that the boy's questions and observations often revealed assumptions that needed examination. He thinks differently from those of us raised in privileged circumstances, the prince observed to Li Yunhua. That perspective is valuable precisely because it's uncommon among court officials. Li Gang, meanwhile, had grown strong and confident under the training of the prince's martial arts instructors and military advisors. At 8 years old, he displayed natural leadership abilities that emerged when he played with other children in the prince's household and neighborhood. Servants' children and young relatives who visited the residence naturally followed Li Gang's suggestions and looked to him for guidance during games and activities. More importantly, both boys had absorbed the moral lessons that emphasized service to others over personal advancement. They understood that their own good fortune created obligations to help those who remained in circumstances they had escaped. Li Ming often asked his mother and Prince Li Kuan about ways to improve conditions for poor families, while Li Gang declared his intention to become a general who would protect common people from bandits and corrupt officials. These attitudes pleased Li Yunhua and Li Kuan enormously, confirming that material comfort and social elevation had not corrupted the boy's essential character. Chapter 10. The Imperial Recognition. As Li Yunhua's reputation for competence and insight spread through Chang'an's administrative circles, her work began attracting attention from the highest levels of imperial government. Emperor Taizong himself had heard reports about Prince Li Kuan's unusual advisor and her contributions to improving provincial administration and corruption detection. The emperor summoned Li Yunhua to court for a personal audience, an honor unprecedented for someone of her background. The interview, conducted in the presence of Prince Li Kuan and senior ministers, focused on her recommendations for preventing the kind of corruption that had destroyed her first husband and so many other honest officials. The current system allows accusations to be made anonymously and investigated by the accuser's allies, Li Yunhua explained with the careful precision that had characterized all her work. Honest officials become vulnerable to false charges whenever they interfere with profitable corruption schemes. She proposed reforms that would require corroborating evidence for corruption charges, independent investigation by officials from different provinces, and compensation for families of those found innocent after investigation. These suggestions demonstrated sophisticated understanding of both the technical aspects of corruption and the human costs of false accusations. Emperor Taizong was sufficiently impressed to implement several of Li Yunhua's recommendations as imperial policy. More significantly, he offered her an official position in the imperial administration, an extraordinary elevation for a woman with her background. The appointment as Imperial Inspector of Provincial Administration made Li Yunhua one of the most powerful women in the Tang government and provided her family with wealth and status that exceeded what they had possessed before their original disgrace. But perhaps more importantly, the appointment validated Li Yunhua's intelligence and capabilities in ways that restored her sense of self-worth and demonstrated to her sons that merit could triumph over circumstances. Prince Li Kuan took pride in Li Yunhua's achievements while recognizing that her success reflected well on his own judgment and principles. Chapter 11. The New Imperial Family. Li Yunhua's official appointment created an unusual situation within the imperial court and Chang'an society. Her position gave her substantial authority and influence, while her continuing residence in Prince Li Kuan's household maintained their close personal relationship. Rumors began circulating about the exact nature of their connection and whether it might develop into something more formal than mentor and protege. These speculations were encouraged by the obvious affection and mutual respect between Li Yunhua and Prince Li Kuan, as well as by the prince's treatment of her sons as if they were his own nephews or potential heirs. Li Ming and Li Gang had begun calling him uncle naturally, while he took paternal pride in their achievements and development. When Emperor Taizong suggested that Prince Li Kuan should consider marriage to strengthen political alliances, the prince surprised the court by proposing Li Yunhua as his choice. She has proven her intelligence, integrity, and loyalty, he declared. Her sons have demonstrated character and ability that would honor any family. I can think of no alliance that would benefit the dynasty more than formalizing my connection to people of such exceptional merit. The proposal was controversial but not without precedent. Chinese history included examples of emperors and princes who had married accomplished women from non-noble backgrounds, particularly when political advantages could be demonstrated. Li Yunhua herself was initially hesitant about the marriage proposal, not because she lacked affection for Prince Li Kuan, but because she worried about the political complications it might create for him. "Your career and reputation should not be risked for our benefit," she told him during their private discussion of the possibility. But Li Kuan had given the matter careful consideration and concluded that marriage to Li Yunhua would strengthen rather than weaken his position. Her competence and loyalty had already made her valuable to his political activities, while her sons showed potential to become important contributors to the dynasty's future leadership. The wedding ceremony, conducted with full imperial honors, symbolized the Tang Dynasty's openness to merit-based advancement and its ability to recognize talent regardless of social origins. Chapter 12. Legacy of Second Chances. The marriage of Prince Li Kuan and Li Yunhua became one of the most celebrated love stories of the Tang Dynasty, retold in poetry and historical chronicles as an example of how virtue could triumph over circumstance and how wise leadership could transform individual tragedy into collective benefit. Li Yunhua's career as Imperial Inspector led to significant reforms in governmental oversight and corruption prevention, while her influence on Prince Li Kuan's policies contributed to more effective and humane administration throughout the empire. Her unique perspective, combining education with personal experience of injustice, made her an effective advocate for ordinary citizens whose voices were rarely heard in imperial councils. Li Ming grew up to pass the imperial examinations with the highest honors and became one of the dynasty's most respected scholars and administrators. His policies emphasized transparency in government and protection for honest officials, reflecting lessons learned from his father's unjust persecution and his family's subsequent experiences. Li Gang pursued military service and rose to become a general known for his competence in battle and his compassion toward both soldiers and civilians. His troops were famously loyal because they trusted his judgment and knew that he valued their lives above his own advancement. Both sons married well and established families that continued their parents' traditions of service to others and concern for justice. Their children grew up hearing stories about their grandmother's transformation from desperate widow to imperial advisor, learning that circumstances of birth need not determine possibilities for achievement. Prince Li Kuan's decision to take in Li Yunhua and her sons had effects that extended far beyond their individual family. The example of merit-based advancement encouraged other officials to seek out and promote capable people regardless of their backgrounds, while the reforms initiated by Li Yunhua's insights improved governmental effectiveness throughout the empire. The residence where Li Yunhua had first found shelter became a symbol of opportunity and second chances. Future generations of officials would point to it as proof that the Tang Dynasty rewarded virtue and intelligence over inherited privilege, encouraging ambition among talented people who might otherwise have despaired of advancement. In the end, the widow who had been rejected by all found not just acceptance but triumph, while the prince who offered sanctuary discovered that compassion could be the foundation for both personal happiness and effective governance. Their story became part of Chinese cultural memory, illustrating how individual acts of kindness could create transformative change that benefited entire societies.